Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I'm continuing with my discussion on whistleblowing. And so, what I want to do now is just to try and show the distinction between legitimate whistleblowing. So, remember, whistleblowing is actually legal, right? And it's required of government employees, people working for the United States government who observe misconduct, who come into contact, they observe misconduct, waste, abuse, fraud, things like that. But they're proper channels, so they're supposed to report it to the Congress or the proper authority. Uh, we've come a long way since 1778, 1777, since our first whistleblowers, um, you know, uh, you know, reported the misconduct of the first commander in chief of the Continental Navy. That's Commodore Essex Hopkins for his abuse of British prisoners of war. And since then, there have been proper channels. Our government has grown. For instance, the Department of Defense, the proper channel would be your chain of command or the Office of Inspector General. So there are different Office of Inspector General, the Criminal Investigative Service. It could be the Army or the Navy. There are different proper channels that you could use to report misconduct. Um, so but there's I've tried to what I want to try and do is also distinguish from gratuitous illegal leaking, right? Leaking information, for instance, removal of classified information. And remember, there's certain agencies within the government that the work they do, right, would they're cringe, they'd be considered cringe. They would be considered illegal to the American public, right? The CIA, clandestine services, clandestine agencies, what they do are not for public consumption. But they're not supposed to do things on Americans, right? But if they did, you'd notice that I've done a video in which I talked about the instance of when they were testing LSD on there were people, they were testing LSD on Americans, on vulnerable people, members of society, in the MK Ultra project. Nobody was charged. It was the CIA that was doing this, and the information was classified. And in fact, the head of the CIA then, when Congress wanted to see the documents, the head of the CIA at the time, Richard Helms, ordered the destruction of majority of those documents. They were destroyed, right, in order um, to protect some of the people who worked with the CIA on this LSD experiments and so on and so forth. So you have to also remember the CIA clandestine services, not so much the license to kill. If you watch, there's a former CIA officer, Andrew Bustamante, and John Kiriakou, who was a whistleblower, and he went to jail for it because his CIA. So you can't be in the CIA and leak information. There's certain agencies. For instance, I was working as a federal civil servant in the Department of Defense. Right, I'm legitimately allowed to actually report certain things to the Office of Special Counsel, who can prosecute, to the uh, Office of Inspector General. I'm legitimately allowed to follow. The proper channels I can report. If I were working for the CIA, I can't. Right, Office of Special Counsel. There's no way I can report certain things, whatever I see, because the CIA actually reports directly. The head of the CIA reports directly to the president, and there are things that they do. Right, um, they don't charge them. If you watch Andrew Bustamante, as I was saying, a former CIA officer, and they have podcasts now. And John Kiriakou, the guy who was a whistleblower regarding waterboarding and torture. He was charged and sentenced. He was convicted of, was it the violating, the Espionage Act. I think, I don't know if it was the Espionage Act, but leaking information. People who work in the CIA, they're just stuff they can't reveal. They're not like the other civil servants, the CIA, DIA, and I think maybe FBI. So then the intelligence agencies, because there's clandestine services, they're just things they do. If you watch those two guys, once they were asked if they'd killed people before, right? In their intelligence work, they wouldn't say yes or no. They wouldn't admit, but so those people in clandestine services, yeah, sometimes they ordered, and he said it, they were saying it, that sometimes they ordered to eliminate people and they make it look, they stage it, they make people disappear. In intelligence, uh, you know, in the clandestine services. So it's very, very dangerous. So those people, the nature of their work, because of what they do not, they can't expose or reveal information, right? They're going to just directly, they do stuff to them, right? Jail, them being imprisoned is the least of their worries. That's actually good for them, right? If they're in the clandestine services, they could eliminate them, they could kill them, right? That's what they signed up for, right? It's like being in the military. Now, in the military, though, if you're fighting, so I'm going to give examples. The military, their laws, Geneva Conventions and whatnot, they're laws that people have to follow, that warring, adverse combatants, lawful combatants, and nations that are in, sovereign nations that are in war with one another, they're international there's international law they have to abide by. Jus in bello. I've done videos explaining what jus in bello. That's once you're in war, the conduct of war, how you conduct war. There are things they're supposed to do. So again, leaks are illegal, right? If you're leaking information to the public, it's just gratuitous, right? It's not to solve a problem, even if you think you're doing it for altruistic reasons. uh, our government is a government of order, and you've taken an oath to the Constitution. There are proper channels for it, for resolving it. Unfortunately, yes, sometimes there's a backlash. If you're trying to report to your commander or whatever in the military that, well, there's something going wrong, yes, they can probably make you look like you're crazy. If you recall the movie A Few Good Men, you saw what happened. Or if you have, I'm not going to discuss A Few Good Men. That's one of my favorite movies. You could watch A Few Good Men, which has Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, Demi Moore. One of my favorite movies, and Kevin Bacon. So yeah, they could stage your death. That's literally, things like that literally happen, right? If there's misconduct and you're trying to report it, well, they in some of the government agencies, maybe they could do things bad. I mean, I've experienced it. I experienced it in the Department of the Navy, Department of Defense. What I'm experiencing, I've been talking about being wrongfully detained. That was a false flag operation, right? It turns out that maybe they don't have the sharpest people in the Navy. I mean, people I was working with. So they staged something, and it's very obvious, right? It's very obvious that this is what they did. It was a false flag operation. They were behind all the stuff that I'm going, my wrongful detention, the assault on me. This is where I was shot. So yes, people who want to do think they want to do right by the government, sometimes if they try and go through the proper channel, there might be a blowback. But still, that's what you signed up for, working for the government. So I'm going to just talk about the distinction, right? Be with proper, the legitimate way of whistleblowing. Because whistleblowing, again, it's legal, right? You're reporting misconduct. You have a duty to report misconduct in the government. That's legitimate. But there's a way you're supposed to do it versus leaking, a gratuitous leak that could just end you. It could land you in prison. You could even get a death penalty as a result, right? That you'd be violating very serious laws like the Espionage Act of 1917. Um, and the whistleblowing thing, it's consistent with our ideals. Americans, our government, we view ourselves as a good nation, right? We're actually very sanctimonious about it. And most Americans as well, we don't view ourselves like Nazis, like Nazi Germany, right? Yes, this is our Nazi era, though. We're going through some terrible times right now. But traditionally, Americans, we view ourselves as a good nation. From even before we became a nation, from the beginning, 1630, the uh, John Winthrop's, that's a Puritan leader who formed the Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, who called, uh, he coined, people say he coined the phrase, but it's actually from the Bible. It's from Jesus' words that, America, that we're a city up upon a hill, like, as a beacon of hope to others, right? Coming from far and wide. So, shining city on a hill, right, refers to American exceptionalist. So, exceptionalism. So, from John Winthrop in 1630 to Alexis de Tocqueville in the 1830s in his book Democracy in America, when he coined the phrase of American exceptionalism, right? Up to Ronald Reagan, right? Who, again, channeled John Winthrop and the Bible, calling America a shining city upon a hill. So that's how we see ourselves, as a good, moral, and just nation, right? We would flinch at certain things, right? That's why we were angry with the notion of the internment of the Japanese during the Second World War, and we paid reparations for that. So, so within our government, when there's something going wrong, we want to make sure it's right. And I'll just remind us of the Whistleblower Act, the first whistleblower law that was signed by Congress, signed by Henry Lawrence, who was president of the Second Continental Congress, in July 30, um, 1778, after 10 sailors and Marines had reported the commander in chief um, of the Continental Navy of having tortured and abused British prisoners of war, and he was subsequently dismissed. So this is the writing from the 1778 Whistleblower Protection Act. I'm just going to quickly read it and remind us, and I'll give two examples of the proper form of whistleblowing. So, Whistleblower Protection Act of 1778. So it's sort of incumbent. So I'll just read directly. It says, "It is the duty of all persons in the service of the United States, as well as all other the inhabitants thereof, to give the earliest information to Congress or other proper authority of any misconduct, frauds, or misdemeanors committed by any officers or persons in the service of these states, which may come to their knowledge." So signed by President Henry Lawrence. So that's that's what it is. Now I'm going to discuss two instances, but this video is getting long. I don't want to make it too long. The two instances I want to discuss are the proper way, right? They're going to reflect the proper way, and then the bad way. So there was Joe Darby, right? He was an Army Sergeant, right, who reported the abuses in um, Abu Ghraib prison. He got photos on two CD-ROMs, and he gave those photos, right, to they're photos of people he was working with. They were in the 372nd um, uh, unit or whatever together, right, in Iraq, and his colleagues, right, in they were in the same company, and he had photos of them torturing prisoners in Iraq in Abu Ghraib prison. He reported it. He was an MP, military police, and army reservist. He reported it to the Army Criminal Investigation Command, and of course, This went on. Eventually these people were prosecuted. Um, he wasn't charged or anything like that because he went through the proper channels and they had violated Geneva Conventions. So the military, we there there are codes that they have, their standards, their rules, uh, codes of conduct, and the people he reported were court-martialed. Um, there was a blowback, however. While he did get an award, the John F. Kennedy Profiles in Courage Award in 2005, he there was a backlash in the U.S. in Maryland, of course, Maryland, city of thugs, um, land of thugs rather, and of course that's because I was doxxed and swatted in Maryland by Montgomery County Police um, in backlash to my whistleblowing, which is legitimate. I wasn't, it was just something, trivial. I was doing my job, and I was almost killed. Yeah, so this guy was threatened, him and his wife, so he had to actually go into uh, military custody, protective custody, because his life was being threatened, him and his family. So that was the proper channel. So you see, he wasn't charged with anything because he did it the proper way. He reported misconduct in the military, in the Abu Ghraib prison, uh, to the proper command, proper channel, and those people were prosecuted, right? And he became a hero. His life's become, unsafe because there was a blowback. People were threatening his life, but he did his job, he did the right thing. On the other hand, there's Chelsea Manning, right? Chelsea Manning um, was an intelligence analyst um, in the army in Iraq as well, in the army, and I don't know if to say he or she, I think she goes by she now, uh, since changed her gender. Became transgender, changed her identity from sex, from male to female. She leaked 750,000 classified and sensitive materials to WikiLeaks, right? Gratuitously, that was clearly illegal. So she was convicted of the Espionage Act. She pled guilty. She was lucky. She could have gotten the death penalty had it gone to trial, but she pled guilty and she was sentenced to 35 years in prison. But she was pardoned by President Obama, so she only served 7 years, and she's free. But she was dishonorably discharged from the army and lost all her pay and all of that stuff. So there's a way to do it. Whistleblowing, legitimate, it's proper. There's a channel, there's a chain of command, a way you're supposed to actually report it, proper channel. The way Joe Darby did it, the sergeant in the army who reported the abuses of Abu Ghraib prison in 2004, um, versus the way Chelsea Manning did it, right? Um, of course, Daniel Ellsberg became popular. Daniel Ellsberg also did it in a legal way by taking out classified documents in the Pentagon Papers. I'm going to do another video and I'll explain that later. But Daniel Ellsberg had been a Pentagon analyst and he took out classified documents, thousands of them, right? Maybe it was about 7,000 pages, but thousands, and leaked it to the New York Times to show that the president and the Secretary of Defense had been misleading the American public on the prosecution, the scope of the Vietnam War. And although he became a hero in the American public, he was actually charged. Was charged for violating the Espionage Act, and he could have gotten over 100 years in prison, life in prison, but and theft of government property. Again, if you're working in classified area, you're not supposed to remove these things. You're not supposed to remove these documents. And what uh, he ended up, although he was charged, the charges were dismissed because of the inadmissibility of the evidence against him. The way the evidence against him was gathered was illegal, right? And that was through Richard Nixon's illegal plumber's activity, right? Richard Nixon had this White House Special Investigations Unit that included G. Gordon Liddy, a former FBI agent, and Howard Hunt, a former CIA agent. And they did illegal things, right? Illegal things. And including, they'd been going to break it. They broke into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. They were doing things that were illegal. So the way the evidence, because the evidence was gathered illegally, the court that was trying the case against him dismissed it because the evidence was inadmissible. So there's a proper way. So I wanted to just distinguish leaks, right? A leak, Pentagon papers were leaks. Yeah, there's still whistleblowing, but there's no protection for that. There's no protection for that. There's no protection. So you're going to go through a trial. You'll be criminally. It's a crime. You'll be criminally prosecuted. Doesn't matter what you're trying to do. In the case of Chelsea Manning as well, that was a leak. That was illegal. Didn't go through the proper channel. So she was also charged with aiding the enemy. So she was charged with treason. So she could have gotten the death penalty, as opposed to the proper way. Joe Darby, who became a hero, he wasn't charged with any crime. He was hailed as a hero, because he did the right thing. He did his job. What the U.S. government and what the American public expects of him. My name is Oluro Timiosha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.